welcome back to my channel. So my name is Fumi Owalabi for anybody that's new here. The topic of our video today is how I passed the CIPP US exam on the first try. So let's get into it. So I will take us back to 2019. I had found out about privacy a couple of months earlier in August, and then I decided I was going to sit for my first exam. Because the conference that I had attended, the speaker at the conference was like, the best way to break into privacy is to take the certifications, because that will demonstrate to potential employers or clients that this is a field that you are really very interested in. So I went to the conference around June, July, and then I paid for my examination in August, and I was set to take the exam in December. So I gave myself 3 months. So the first thing that I did was I bought the book from the IAPP website. That was the first thing that I did. The second thing that I did was I took a look at creating myself a study schedule. Now, what was my study schedule going to look like? It was basically going to fit around my day job. At the time, I was commuting into Washington, DC for my job, and I wasn't working in the data protection space at this point. So I planned to study for my exam during my commute, and my commute was about an hour both ways, so 2 hours a day solid to study for the exam. And then on the weekends I planned on my schedule to study for about 4 to 5 hours a day, so 4 hours on Saturday and 4 hours on Sunday. So it would be 2 hours a day for my commute, and I would either read the book or take practice questions. And the IAPP website does provide questions if you are looking to practice what you might be seeing on the exam. And because this was a new field for me, I felt that I needed 3 months to study very well for the test. I don't like to book exams unless I know I'm definitely going to pass them. So I give myself enough prep time. And if any of you are looking to find out a good study schedule for yourself, I will leave below a Google Doc of the exact schedule that I created for myself at the time, because anytime I take a certification, I create a folder on my laptop for that certification. Any resources that I either have or create for myself, I put into this folder and I store. And I've been doing that since 2019. So after I created the schedule, I stuck with it. So Monday through Friday, the hour to my job, I would study for the test. I would bring my book and I would study and read on the train. And then on my way back, I would do the same. And I would do that for all of September and all of October. Now, November rolls around and I'm like, this is a brand new field, I need more resources. So I go back to the IAPP website and I buy the 50 practice questions that they provide. And to this day, they still provide 50 practice questions. But 50 practice questions is kind of slim when you're trying to break into a field, which is one of the reasons why I created my own 300 practice questions for the CIPP US exam. Based on my experience and my understanding of how the questions are, I've actually created my own resource for people that are brand new to the field that are looking to break in. But back to the story, in October, I realized that I didn't have enough resources. So I went onto Amazon and I started to look for other books that other practitioners had created from a practice question perspective. So the IAPP exam for the CIPP US, it's actually 90 questions and you have 150 minutes to complete those questions. So practice makes perfect, right? It's one thing to read the book. It's another thing to actually practice the questions and actually have an understanding of what it is that you might encounter when you take the exam. So when I went on Amazon, I actually found another resource, thankfully. Now, there still aren't all that many practice question books that are available. There are some here and there, but in 2019 at the time, somebody else had created a resource, and I think it was another 90 questions. So what I had to work with was the official IAPP book, 50 questions that I purchased from IAPP, and 90 practice questions that I bought on Amazon from another practitioner who was selling them. So this is what I do. The first thing I did was read the book through fully. I read the book through fully and I set myself a page target every single day. So every single day, for example, I can't remember the target amount, but I would set myself, you need to read 15 pages. So I think on average, the IAPP books are about 400 pages long. So every single day I was reading about 10 to 15. And then I read the book through once. And then I started the book over the second time and I started to highlight sections based on the practice questions that I'd bought from the IAPP and the ones that I bought from Amazon. So I highlighted those and I went through the book the second time. The third time around, I started to test myself. So I actually created my own flashcards because I didn't see any flashcards available. And something that I find very interesting now and something that I would advise going forward is if you are studying for the CIPP US exam, you should consider using Quizlet. I didn't know about Quizlet at the time, but Quizlet is a fantastic resource. And basically what Quizlet is, I'll leave a link to what Quizlet is below. It's basically where other students who have taken the exam, they actually create flashcards and you can use them on your phone, which is great. Because at the time, I was actually just writing the flashcards on the train to my job. But what I didn't know is that I could just scroll, download Quizlet, scroll, and have the flashcards available on my phone. So everything was electronic, which is great now. The other resource that I wish I had used when I was studying for the CIPP US exam is if you log into Scribed, I'll leave a link to what Scribed is below. People share resources that they have for the CIPP US exam. So I didn't know this at the time and I didn't use this for my own study, but I will leave a link below for those of you that are studying for this test. If you go onto Scribed, people will share questions that you can download or view directly on Scribed, and it gives you additional resources so you can study for the test. So what you really want to do when you're taking these exams is have a breadth of resources that you're relying on in order to pass. Because sometimes not everything is covered and sometimes it's not covered in great detail. You want to position yourself in the best way in order to be able to pass the exam, which is one of the reasons why I read every textbook through at least twice, sometimes 3 times, and we'll talk about that in another video. But I always read every single book through twice. The second time around, I highlight it. Now, the third thing that I did when I was practicing for taking the test is I created a outline and I wrote down all of the laws and all of the tricky questions that I felt like is not something that I would be able to guess, right? There are certain laws in the US that have been enacted in a particular year. That's not something you can guess on the exam. You have to know that. In addition to that, some of the case law, you need to memorize the case law because that's not something you can guess on the exam. The question, there's only going to ever be one response to those questions and they do appear. So you need to prepare for that. So I created an outline and I listed questions that I knew that I would not be able to guess or have a good measure of. Now, I'll tell you something about these questions. For the most part, and as you begin to read the textbook, you'll see that there are 2 questions that are automatically incorrect. Generally, for the most part, they are like, there's no way about it, these are wrong. Then there's always 2 questions that it's always in between, and you have to make a very educated guess based on the studies that you've conducted, which is why you need to have multiple resources. I personally would never take the CIPP US exam again, exclusively relying on just the IAPP textbook. I would always look for all of the resources available to me first, and then I would work between all of those because there's going to be information that's captured in other resources. I also encourage students to create their own resources because it shows memory retention. And for the CIPP US exam, I did create 2 of my own resources. Now, in further videos, we can talk about what I've been doing going forward. Again, I've taken many of these exams at this point, so I don't always create my own resources. But for that first exam in 2019, I did create 2 resources. 1, the flashcards, which you can now get on Scribed, and 2, I created an outline. And sometimes Scribed will actually have an outline. Sometimes you need to create it yourself. So it really just depends on how best you study. I personally study best when I have a textbook. It's really difficult for me to not have a guide showing me what I might encounter because I like to be sure before I book my test. And so after all of this, I paid for the test in September or August, and then I booked the exam mid-November. So I booked the exam to take it in December, but I chose my selection date. And I always take my exams in person because I feel like the pressure really helps me to stay focused. So I booked the exam for December, and 2 weeks before I took the exam, I went through my flashcards once again. I didn't bother to read the textbook again at that point because at that point I'd read it through 3 times. And that was the main resource that I used. Now, if you're looking for other resources, I'm going to leave a link to other resources that I found since I've taken a bunch of these certifications now. But ultimately, I think it's really important to always look for the official IAPP guides that you can purchase. And then subsequent to that, you can create your own, or you can outsource and look on different platforms like Amazon, because there are more resources since 2019, but you should, 1, exercise your own due diligence with looking at which is best for how you study, and 2, make sure that you are consistent with the days that you study. I told you guys that I would study on the train on the way to my job. And I did that every single day. I did not allow myself to get distracted because that was the bulk of my study time. And what I would do at the weekends with the practice questions, I would sit down, time myself, and I would make sure that I was passing exams. If I was getting them wrong, I was explaining to myself why, and I was always going back. And that consistency is what allowed me to pass that exam at the first try. So I really hope this was useful for you. If you have any questions, you can leave a comment below. And if you like this type of content, or you're considering taking any of the privacy exams, subscribe to this channel. There's lots more content to come, and I'll see you in another video.